Thank you for joining us for this week's message at Crosswind Church. In this series, Dear Brothers, Sincerely Joseph, Jeremy guides us through the book of Genesis, revealing a lesson on forgiveness. This sermon is the conclusion of our four-part series. If you have missed any of the past 4 weeks, you can go to www.crosswindchurch.net and look under the Resources tab to find the videos and podcasts for the past 4 weeks. If you have any other questions, you can email us at info@crosswindchurch.net.
Well, today we get to finish the series we started a few weeks ago, this Dear Brothers, Sincerely Joseph series, and I know that it's been hard. I know that it's been thought provoking. If you are here for the first time today, man, we are so thankful that you're here. But you're kind of coming in on the tail end of a conversation that we've been having for 4 weeks, and so if you've missed one of the weeks previously, you'll be able to follow along today. That's our goal. But we want to go. We want to encourage you to go to crosswindchurch.net, click on the resources button, and listen to the messages leading up to this point, because it all kind of tells a story together, and I want you to know the whole entire story. And I hope you're ready to conclude that today, because I know I am. It's been challenging and good for me as well. I wanted to begin today by telling you a story about me, and I struggled with even whether or not I should tell this story, because I've told, I think, every piece of it and in my time here. I don't know that I've ever told it all together. I know there's individuals that I've shared this with, but I don't know that I've shared with you with you all as a whole. And so if you've heard all or part of this story, bear with me because I think it's going to help us kind of engage with Joseph's story today. You all have heard me say that my mother was 19 years old when she got pregnant with me. She was not married. She had no education. She was living at home with mom and dad, just graduated from high school. And in the late 70s, when you get, which is when I was born, I'm old, and what you did is you got married. That was the thing to do, and we could debate whether it still is or not, but they did, and they got married, and circumstances then ensued that I'll never know all of and don't need to know all of. But before I was born, my biological father divorced my mom, and I spent the first portion of my life not knowing him. I didn't know who he was. I knew that he wasn't in the picture. As far as I know, there was never any attempts to contact me, to know me, birthday cards, Christmas presents, phone calls, none of that, and that was okay. I'm not complaining about that at all. I had an amazing life. Well, toward the end of my 3-year-old year, I don't remember much of all of this. I remember bits and pieces. I have glimpses of it in my mind. My mom met the man that would later become my daddy, and they started dating, and they fell in love, and he spent time with me, and we would go out on the farm, and I can remember all sorts of things. And when I was 4 years old, my mom and my dad got married. I watched my mom down the aisle, looked amazing in a tuxedo as a 4-year-old. You better believe it. I can remember bits and pieces of that wedding. I can remember parts of the days that ensued. What I will tell you is this. Immediately after the marriage, the wedding, my dad began the process to adopt me, which, if you'll just wrap your head around that for a minute, like, there's times I can't even fathom the idea of adoption, because, like, my dad didn't have to make me his own, but he chose to. That was so cool. He wasn't trapped into making me his son. He had an option, and he said, I want him to be my son. I'll never get over that. As a part of that process, my biological father would have to sign over his parental rights. That's when trouble ensued. And that's when it began a 2-year legal battle over what my last name would be. There were court dates that, praise God, I didn't have to go to. There were visitation rights that were awarded to him, even though I hadn't seen him forever. I wouldn't have known him if he'd have talked to me. I began having to go over to his house and hang out with his family and play video games over there. It wasn't all that bad, but still, it was a hiccup in my life. Until finally, I don't remember all of the circumstances. I was very young, but I remember that there was a phone call that he made to my mother where he said, Jeremy doesn't want to be here. He'll never want to be here. And I'll sign the papers. And the adoption was complete. Summer before I went into the second grade, my last name officially became Powell. My daddy, who had always been my daddy, now legally was my daddy. It would have been real easy for me to hold a grudge, to have been upset. I've talked to so many people whose family situation was similar, right? Their dad was absent or didn't want to be a part of their life or whatever, and they were bitter and they were upset and they were hurt because of that, and justifiably so. On some degree, I understand. I would have been well within my rights. You would have said, you know what, Jeremy, it would have been okay for you to be angry. It would have been okay for you to be sad. But I wasn't. I wasn't. You see, I had an amazing daddy. I had an amazing family. They taught me about Jesus. They taught me how to love and how to forgive and how to handle conflict and confrontation. They taught me so many good things. There was no room in my life for anger, I thought. And if you'd asked me throughout high school and college, Jeremy, have you forgiven your biological father? The answer is absolutely I have. There's no doubt in my mind I have forgiven him. I wouldn't know him if he fell on me, right? I don't know who he is, but yeah, I've forgiven him. And then something happened. Something that I wasn't expecting. Something that made me realize that the issue that was my biological father was not something that I had really dealt with, but something I just put on the back burner. See, when I graduated from college, I went to Vanderbilt and studied medicine for a year, microbiology and immunology in particular. I'm a nerd. It's okay. In the middle of that, God called me to the ministry, and I left, and I went back and moved into my childhood room and took a job as a youth minister and taught PE at a Christian school. I was like Hunter Rice with a part-time job as youth minister and part-time job as PE teacher. There was no way in the world I was qualified to teach children PE. No way at all. I'm just thankful no one got hurt too terribly badly. Only one emergency room trip that year. I taught kindergarten through 8th grade. Wow, not on the same day. They rotated come in. I'll never forget the day that this little third grader came to me, this little girl, brunette. She came to me and she looked at me and said, Coach Powell, which is what they called me. I thought it was pretty cool. I was never coach or anything. Coach Powell. Coach Powell, I believe you're my cousin. And I went, excuse me? Like, I thought maybe somewhere in the Powell line. I mean, this is 20 years past, right? Somewhere, somebody's related. And I went, well, I don't really think that's true. And she said, yeah, I think my daddy is your daddy's brother. Well, I know that's not true. And then she said, well, do you know? And she gave the name of my biological father. It was one of the hardest things I ever had to do was to be polite to that little girl. I'm not certain I was. I tried to be. I remember saying to her, no, you probably need to go back and talk to your daddy again. I don't think that's right. After she left me that day, I can tell you what emotions came into my heart. Frustration, anger, resentment. I began to rant in my mind. Have y'all ever done that? Right? Where you begin to kind of rehearse what you're going to say to people before you actually say it. Here are some things that went through my mind. How dare he? How dare they? Where have they been? It's been 20 years. They don't have a right to me. They don't have a right to tell their daughter that. They don't have a right to tell their family that. They don't have a right to tell anybody in the community that. They haven't been my daddy. They haven't been my family. And now all of a sudden that I'm back in the community after college, now all of a sudden that I'm working in the church and doing whatever else I'm doing, now all of a sudden they're going to come out of the woodwork? No. And I was furious, hurt, and all kinds of emotion that I didn't even think was inside of me. And here's when I realized it. Here's when it dawned on me. You see, I can say that I'd forgiven all I wanted to. But there was something inside of me that was harboring anger and resentment and frustration that I had never, ever dealt with. That's when I realized forgiveness is more than just the words that come out of your mouth. It's a position of your heart. Forgiveness is more than just a verbal affirmation that things are okay. It is a position of your heart. And God began in me a 2-year or more process to work through that and wrestle with that. And today, as we wrap up the series, we've been building to this point. So far, what we've asked you is this. We've said, who is it that you blame for your broken dreams? Who is it that you blame for your hurt? Against whom are you harboring resentment and anger and frustration? Where are those broken relationships that are there because of hurt? And if you had a chance, we asked you in week 2, to look at that person that you blame, what would you say to them? We said maybe it was a spouse or a child or a parent. Maybe it was a friend, a coworker, a boss. Maybe it's God. Maybe it's even yourself. But who is it? And last week we asked a really, really, really tough question. Last week we said, who is it that you've even put on the back burner? That maybe you think you've forgiven, but you really haven't dealt with. You really haven't faced the circumstances. That's where we find Joseph today. He's been thrown in a pit, sold into slavery by his brothers. He's been put as a slave in a man's house where he was falsely accused of raping a woman. He's been thrown in jail. He's been forgotten. And now 13 years after he was sold by his brothers, he finds himself elevated in the court of Pharaoh to the second in command, to the most powerful person in the world. And what we saw last week was, although Joseph felt like he had moved past his past, although Joseph felt like now he's finally come about and his dreams have finally been fulfilled, although Joseph felt like, hey, now might be the time I've moved on, we know there's something very deep down. We know because he named his first child, Manasseh, God has made me forget. He had his second child, Ephraim, God has made me prosper in the land of my enemies. And we know that there's still this boiling, burning, churning, some kind of issue that he hasn't dealt with. And the thing is I know inside of some of you, it's there as well. Today, what we get to deal with, we get to look at, is we get to look at how Joseph got to handle the situation. When his dreams came true, and when his brothers, whom he had thought he had forgotten, showed back up on the scene. We're going to read primarily from Genesis chapter 45. So if you want to turn there in your Bibles, you can follow along with me on the screen, but I want to tell you kind of how we get there. Joseph becomes second in command to Pharaoh, as we mentioned, and I can imagine what it was like as he was walking down the street or riding down the street in Pharaoh's chariot, and the word that goes before him is bow the knee, bow the knee, bow the knee, and Joseph probably thought, my dreams now have finally come true, everything has been made right, here we are, I've finally gotten what it is that God has promised me. And he told Pharaoh there's going to be 7 years of plenty and 7 years of famine, and you need to store up during the years of plenty so you have during the years of famine. And so Joseph actually puts that plan into practice. And for 7 years of abundance, Joseph stores up 20% of everyone's crops in the Pharaoh's storehouses. Sure enough, famine hits. Sure enough, the drought hits. Sure enough, trouble comes, and people need grain to eat. They need grain to feed their livestock. They need grain to plant the fields. And so they come to Joseph and they pay him for it. And he's collecting money for Pharaoh's coffers, and he's giving out grain, and he's saving the world, feeding the world. And all of a sudden, this group of 10 men show up. They're foreigners. Joseph is using a translator, we're told. They come and they bow down at the feet of Joseph. Scripture tells us that Joseph recognizes them immediately. It's 10 of his brothers. They don't know Joseph. They don't see Joseph. They don't recognize Joseph. Number one, they weren't looking for him. Number two, he was fully decked out in Egyptian garb and shaved and all of that kind of stuff. There's no way they would have recognized him. So Joseph doesn't immediately kind of tell them what's going on. He says, you guys are spies. You're not here for grain. And they go, oh no, we promise we're here for grain. And so Joseph begins questioning them. Tell me about your dad. Is he still alive? Do you have any other siblings? Yes, we have another brother, Benjamin, who's back home with daddy. And so Joseph says, here's what's going to have to happen. You got to bring me Joseph. You got to bring me Benjamin. Well, we can't bring Benjamin. There's no way. No, you have to bring Benjamin, or I'm not going to give you anything. In fact, I'm going to put Simeon, your brother, in jail until you bring me Benjamin. So 9 of them head back to their father, who's distressed that now another brother has been lost in Egypt, and they won't be able to get any more grain unless the youngest Benjamin goes back. But a couple months later, maybe a year later, we see that they have to go back to Egypt again. There they bring Benjamin. Joseph frames them in an elaborate plot. It's kind of weird. Kind of accuses them of stealing as a way to kind of get them to stay in Egypt. And before long, you have them begging for the life of Benjamin, begging that they would take Judah instead and send Benjamin back. That there's this turmoil, this frustration as his brothers are now faced with hunger and starvation, and yet here we are in this foreign land with this man that we don't think we know. And meanwhile, Joseph, this is so neat. Joseph has his brothers right where he wants them. He could do anything he wanted to them. In fact, let's just be honest. If he'd have called out the Egyptian guard and said to the Egyptian guard, these were the men that sold me into slavery, I want every one of them killed. Today in church, our message might be, you know what? You shouldn't mess with a man of God in his dreams. What would you say if the people that hurt you and wronged you were now sitting at your feet at your mercy? What would you do? Let's see what Joseph did. Look at chapter 45, verse 1. Then Joseph could no longer control himself before his attendants, and he cried out, have everyone leave my presence. So there was no one with Joseph when he made himself known to his brothers. And he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard him, and Pharaoh's household heard about it. Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph. Is my father still living? But his brothers were not able to answer him because they were terrified at his presence. I need you to realize something. Joseph could have called in the guard. Joseph could have called it. Joseph could himself have taken a sword and killed every one of his brothers. And he would have been right to take vengeance. But he doesn't do that. I want you to understand what Joseph does here. Joseph takes everyone and sends them out of the room. Let me tell you what that means. That means that Joseph protects his brothers from everyone else that might hear what it is that his brothers have done to him. You want me to put it in another way? Joseph didn't tell anyone what these 9 men, 10 men now, had done to him. He didn't tell anyone. Isn't that interesting? Because normally when someone wrongs us, isn't that what we want to do? Is tell everybody about it? Go right to social media and give some kind of passive-aggressive post on Facebook like, I know you've been saying stuff about me, and if you want to say something about me, come say something about me to my face because I don't play that way or whatever else. Like you're not saying something to their face, you're saying it on social media. Right? We want to tell everybody about it, isn't it? I wonder why it is. I wonder if it's because we want them to be drugged through the mud. You know, I think it is the fact that if we're hurting, we want someone else to hurt. And I'll be doggone if somebody's going to think good about that person after they've hurt me. No. That person can't have a good reputation. That person can't have good things. That person can't live a life free of guilt and shame. That person, everyone needs to know what they've done. Don't we do that? Everyone needs to know how they've wronged me. And so we sit down and we have combos with as many people who will listen. And we have text message combos with as many people that are listening. And we sit down and we share prayer requests that are really just gossip. Now, I'm not saying that it's wrong for you to confide in someone. I'm not saying that it's wrong even in the context of maybe your home group for you to share that so that someone can pray for you. But listen, folks, at some point it's got to stop and at some point it's got to end. Joseph says, if I'm going to truly forgive you, the first thing I have to do is I have to make sure that I protect you and protect your name. And no one is going to think bad things about you because I'm not going to let them know what you did. Can I just tell you something? That's the difference in saying you forgive somebody and the position of forgiveness in your heart. Not easy, is it? not easy. Look what happens next. He goes on. I'm going to read verse 3 again. Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph. Is my father still living? But his brothers were not able to answer him because they were terrified at his presence. My response to that verse is, you think? You think they're terrified? Wouldn't you be? Here's the one we thought was dead. We told Daddy he was dead. We faked his death. We sold him off into slavery. And now we're sitting here at his mercy. Best case scenario, he sends us home with no grain and we starve to death. Worst case scenario, we're sold as slaves in the same way that he was, or put to death, or our family is put to death. Like there's no way out. They are terrified. Look at verse 4. Then Joseph said to his brothers, I love this, come close to me. And when they had done so, he said, I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now do not be stressed. I want to pause right there. Let me tell you this is so cool. He brings them in. He goes, guys. It's me. I know what you did. I know where I've been better than you do. Don't be afraid. Let me tell you how big that is. Because fear is a pretty good manipulating tool that we like to hold over people. We kind of want them to fear us just a little bit. I can remember at one point in time I was serving at a church, and we were a part of an organization of churches, a network of churches, and for whatever reason, the person that was in charge of that organization and I didn't get off on the best foot. We kind of saw some things differently, and he had said some things that were not very nice about me, and said some things that were not very nice to me, and all of those things, and yet nonetheless, I tried to interact in that organization, and I tried to do some things in that organization, but I was never asked to serve on any kind of leadership. I was never asked to be people from my church were not asked to be a part of different groups or subcommittees or whatever of that organization. And then one year at the annual meeting of that organization, I got the phone call that the group that was in charge had wanted me to come and speak. I was going to be one of the speakers. And I got the phone call from the leader of this organization, and he called me up and he said, hey, Jeremy, you've been asked to speak. And I graciously accepted. And at that moment, I could kind of hear it in his voice. He was not happy, first of all, that I had been asked to speak. And number two, he was kind of scared at what I might say. And I can remember about a week or so later, as we were gearing up for that meeting, I was sitting with another pastor in his office, and I made this statement. I'm so ashamed of this. I was telling him about it, and I said, I feel like he's afraid of what I might say. And I kind of like that. That other pastor rebuked me, and he should have. The other pastor was like, man, that's horrible. You're right. That is. But we like that, don't we? On some level, maybe the most carnal part of our hearts. Someone has wronged us, and we know that they've wronged us, and we maybe have same circles, or we kind of interact with each other, and we kind of want them to be just a little bit afraid of us, a little bit afraid that we might tell people what they've done, a little bit afraid that we might expose them for who they are, because as long as they're afraid of us, then we can manipulate them to get what we want. Isn't that right? Think about this. Joseph could have held over his brother's head the rest of their life. This is what you've done. Don't make me tell. This is what you've done. Don't make me tell. This is what you've done. Don't make me go get Pharaoh. But he doesn't do that. Amazingly, he doesn't do that. He calls them in. Close. Come here, brothers. Look, it's me. Yeah, listen. Shh, listen, it's okay. You don't have to be afraid. I'm not going to hurt you in the way that you hurt me. I'm not going to repay evil with evil. I'm going to do something that's different. And that is the difference in saying you forgive somebody and the position or the attitude of your heart. Look what happens next. I'll read verse 5 again. And now, he says, do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now there's been famine in the land, and for the next 5 years there will be no plowing and reaping. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. Not only does he not want them to feel angry, does he not want them to fear to fear him. He doesn't want them to be afraid. This is good. He doesn't want them to feel guilty. Now, I'm just going to be honest with you here. I come from a long line of guilt trippers, right? My grandmother, I love her to death. My mom, she is so good at it. And if she were sitting here, I'd tell her that. She's so good at it, right? She called me up the other day, and she said this. She left a message on my phone because I was in a meeting or something, and I don't know, maybe I big timed her, maybe I didn't. Anyway, she called me up and she left a message. This is what she said. Well, I was just seeing if you were still alive. Your poor grandmother over here. I haven't talked to you in forever, and all I ever get is voicemail when I call. I guess you just don't want to talk to me anymore. Well, if you think about it, and if you still love me, then you give me a call sometime. I listened to it and I just laughed because I was like, that's so classic, my mom. And I called her, and as soon as I called her, she died laughing because she knew how bad it had been. Listen, I learned from the master, right? I learned how to lay a guilt trip. And just like fear, guilt is a good manipulating tool, isn't it? Do you remember what you did to me? You owe me. Do you remember what you did? You should. You need to. You're going to go and do this, or you're going to take care of this because of what it is that you did to me. And as long as they harbor guilt, we maintain power over them. So we don't want to let go of guilt. You want to know the hardest part about this? You know the hardest part about this? Joseph's brothers don't look very sorry, do they? In fact, what they look is terrified. Let's just be honest, right? They're not sorry at this point. They're scared out of their minds. And yet Joseph doesn't want them to feel guilty. Anyway, you see, here's the lie that we buy into. And I need you, if you don't hear anything else, I need you to hear this. Here's the lie that we buy into. You ready? We believe that someone has to say they're sorry in order to forgive them. It's not true. We believe that someone has to come and be repentant and fall at our feet and say, please forgive me, before we offer to them grace and mercy. Can I tell you what? That's not true. You know how I know that's not true? Romans chapter 5, verse 8 says this, but God showed his love for us in that while we were still, what's the word? Sinners. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Before the first person said we're sorry, before the first person repented, before the first person, God says, I'm going to act on their behalf. You don't have to wait for them to say you're sorry. They're sorry. They don't even have to be sorry. We'll talk more about that in a minute. Joseph doesn't want them to feel guilty. He doesn't want them to feel afraid. Look what happens next. This is absolutely amazing. Verse 8. So then, Joseph is still talking to his brothers who are terrified. Up to this point, haven't even been able to speak. So then, it was not you who sent me here, but God. Wait a minute. Joseph just passed the buck from his brothers to God. You think you sold me into slavery? Let me tell you, God is the one that sent me here. This is big. It was not you that sent me here, but God. He made me a father to Pharaoh, Lord to his entire household, ruler of all Egypt. Now, hurry back to my father and say to him, this is what your son Joseph says. God has made me Lord of all Egypt. Come down to me and do not delay. You shall live in the region of Goshen and be near me, you, your children, your grandchildren, your flocks, your herds, and all that you have. I will provide for you there, because 5 years of famine are still to come. Otherwise, you and your household and all who belong to you will become destitute. He doesn't want them to be afraid. He doesn't want them to feel guilty. And now, he lets them save face. Can you believe that? He lets them save face. He even says, look, guys, it's not even on you. This is something God had in store. What you intended for harm, God intended for good. We've been able to save the world and feed the world through what it is God did because you wronged me in such a way. Listen, this is a unique perspective that I want you, my brothers, to have. You were a part of God's plan. You shouldn't be sad about that. You should be happy that God has done what he's done, because now you and your children and your grandchildren, you don't have to worry about grain anymore. You can come down here to Egypt and I'll take care of you. And when you go to daddy, I love this. When you go to dad, this is what you say. He didn't even force him to come up with a story. He doesn't even force them to have to tell Dad what happened. Here, I know that it's going to be trouble, and you're going to debate it all the way home, and you're going to be worrying about what Dad's going to say about what you did to me. This is what you tell Dad. I'm going to let you save face completely. You don't have to tell anybody what you did. I'm not going to tell anybody what you did. Don't be afraid. Don't be guilty. And then lastly, I want good things for you. I want good things for you. I want you to come down here, and I want you to live. And I'm going to take care of you. Do you deserve that? No, you don't deserve that. That's grace. Do you deserve for me to kill you? Absolutely, you deserve for me to kill you. But I'm not going to do that. That's mercy. The difference between saying you forgive somebody and total forgiveness is when you stop wanting bad things for that person that wronged you. You start wanting good things for them. That's when you know that you've let go. I want to fast forward a few years in the story as we wrap this up. Joseph brings his whole family down. He goes to Pharaoh and says, "This is my dad and my brothers, and they're here." And Pharaoh says, "Man, bring them back. Put them in Goshen. Give them the best land. Bring their herds and their flocks down, and let's just take care of them all, Joseph, because your family is my family, and me casa is tu casa." Pharaoh didn't say that. He wasn't Spanish. Okay? Here's the deal. And so all of them come down. God even gives a dream to Israel, to Jacob, and he says, "Listen, don't worry about going down. You go down. There I'm going to make you into a great nation." So they come down and they settle in the land. Years later, Israel dies. Now all of a sudden, all of it comes back up. Look what his brothers say, chapter 50, verse 15. When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, "What if Joseph holds a grudge against us and pays us back for all the wrongs we did to him?" So they sent word to Joseph saying, "Your father left these instructions before he died. This is what you are to say to Joseph. I ask for you to forgive your brothers for their sins and the wrongs they committed in treating you so badly. Now please forgive the sins of the servants of the God of your father." And when their message came to him, he wept. Do you want to know why Joseph was so sad when the message came to him? It's because his brothers didn't believe him that he had forgiven him. It's because his brothers still thought he was holding a grudge. It's because his brothers were still afraid of him. It's because his brothers were still guilty and holding the guilt of what they had done. And Joseph didn't want them to be afraid. He didn't want them to feel guilt. Joseph didn't want them to question his forgiveness. Verse 18, his brothers came to him and threw themselves down before him. "We are your slaves," they said. Verse 19, but Joseph said to him, "Don't be afraid, am I in the place of God?" Verse 20, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. So then, don't be afraid. I'll provide for you and for your children." And he reassured them and spoke kindly to them. When you totally forgive somebody, you forgive them for life. You totally forgive them, you're done. You totally forgive them. You close the book on the debt that they owe you. They don't owe it to you anymore. You intended to shatter my dreams, Joseph might have said. But God was just fulfilling my dreams in a way that we could have never possibly imagined. I told you in week 1 about a dream that I had that I had thought was shattered. I told you about how God had placed in me a desire to help people that were suffering. I thought that meant I needed to go into medicine so that I could stand at the bed of children and adults alike and say, "Look, I know what that feels like. And I know what you're going through. And I know exactly what this pain is going to be like. And I know what the uncertainty feels like. And I know what the fear feels like. And I know in a way that no other doctor and nurse could ever say to Jeremy, I knew that was supposed to be what I was supposed to do." And as I worked at Vanderbilt, in between the semesters at college, I would go and I'd work in the clinical virology lab there. And from time to time, the doctors that had diagnosed me with my disease would call me up. I would love this. And they'd go, "Jeremy, we got a kid on the 5th floor, and mom is flipping out, and he's 5, and he doesn't really know what's going on, and she's scared. And Jeremy, here's what we want you to do: put on a lab coat and go see him. That's it. Put on a lab coat and walk in and just talk to him. Walk into their rooms, and I'd be able to look at these kids, and I'd be able to go, look, okay, look at me. I'm all grown up. I'm in college. I'm doing cool things. Like, you don't have to be afraid. You don't have to be afraid. And then because I'm a follower of Jesus, I would just kind of get to say, and by the way, I have this hope because of Christ that's in me. It's amazing. And I'd walk out of those rooms and I would go, yes, God, that's what it is that you want me to do. And then in the spring of the year 2000, with research going well and school going well, God called me to the ministry, and I thought that those dreams were forever shattered. Maybe that's not what God had placed on my heart. Maybe that's not what it is He wanted me to do. How could I have missed that call? Medicine seemed like the thing that I was so designed to do. And then I made my first hospital visit as a youth minister. And I walked into a hospital room, not with a white lab coat on, but blue jeans and tennis shoes. I grabbed the hand of a patient, a mom, I prayed for. I shared with them what I had been through, and listen, it's okay. There's light on the other side, and even if there isn't, what's the worst that could happen? When you go into surgery today, there's only 2 possible ways for you to wake up. One is groggy and with your family, and the other one's with Jesus. That can't be that bad. And I have a freedom to say and do things that I would have never had the freedom to be able to do. You see, God didn't crush my dreams. God redirected them. In the same way that He did Joseph's. In the same way maybe that He's doing that with you. The dreams that He's placed on your heart. Just because it doesn't turn out the way that you thought it would, it doesn't mean that God isn't at work. Just because someone has wronged you in some way, it doesn't mean that you should hold it over their heads for the rest of their life. Because the difference between forgiveness and total forgiveness is forgiveness is something you speak. Total forgiveness is an attitude of your heart. There's another lie we have to confront today, and that's this. When I was a little boy, my daddy and I would wrestle in the living room the same way that I'll wrestle with my little girls today. And Dad was always a little bit bigger and a little bit stronger. He could always kind of pin me down to the ground, and he would tickle me. Now, I'm getting ready to give you some information that you can use against me. I would rather you punch me in the face than tickle me. Like, I can't stand it. Because there's nothing more helpless, is there? Come on. Than being held down against your will and tickled. Because you can't squirm enough, you can't get away enough, especially when somebody is heavier than you and stronger than you and all of those sorts of things. It's why I enjoy doing that so much to my daughters. There are some of you who are here today, you don't even know it, but you're being held down in the bondage of unforgiveness. The thing that binds you up and the shackles that you wear and the weight you carry with you is not what someone has done to you, but it's your inability to totally forgive them. And the lie we have to confront today is this. We bought into the idea that if I forgive him, if I forgive her, if I forgive them, then I let them off the hook. It's a lie. The only person you're keeping on the hook when you refuse to forgive totally is you. The Eagles, the greatest band that has ever existed in the history of bands. I got an amen somewhere. Okay, good. They wrote a song called, it's my favorite Eagle song. It's called Already Gone. And there's this great line. They were great songwriters, right? I may be the only pastor that's ever quoted the Eagles in a sermon. I quoted Eminem last week, so we're going to, anyway, here's the deal. Watch. It said, so oftentimes it happens that we live our lives in chains. never even knew we had the key. The bondage that you're experiencing now may not be because of what someone did for you or did to you. It may be because you are lacking the ability to totally forgive. It may be because you placed it on the back burner. It may be because you're just not dealing with it. And I'm telling you, there's a freedom that comes when you're able to say, I forgive you. Now, I wish I could tell you that I had done this in every area of my life. I haven't. In fact, I can't even tell you when it happened with my biological father. I can't tell you when it happened. But I can remember when I realized it had happened. I began thinking about it several years after my experience back in my hometown. And I can remember thinking to myself, listen, he was 19 years old when he got my mom pregnant. He was a kid. 4 years later, he's 23 years old, and he fights for custody for me. He was a kid. I bet he was scared. I bet he was confused. I bet he had pressure coming in from all sorts of areas, including his parents and grandparents and brothers and sisters and whatever else. I'm sure he didn't know what in the world he was doing. And I can remember saying to myself, man, I hope he's had a good life. I can remember saying to myself, man, I hope he hasn't carried around the burden of me for 20 some odd years because look, I've had an amazing life. I have an amazing father. I wouldn't trade him for the world. I hope that he got married and had kids. I don't want him to be bald and fat. I want him to be happy. I don't want him to carry that guilt around. And as those words came out of my mouth, I can remember remembering Joseph's story and going, that's so freeing. That's so freeing to go, he's released. He didn't ask for it. He may not even be sorry. It's not about freeing him. It's about releasing me. So here's where we end up this story today. It's with the realization that the difference between forgiveness and total forgiveness is the position of your heart. Last week and the week before, we began asking you, who is it that you lay blame with? Is it a spouse, an ex-spouse, a boyfriend, a girlfriend, the boy or the girl at school, a boss, a coworker? Is it a child or a parent? Who is it that you're blaming? Who is it that you haven't forgiven? Please. Last week we asked you, who is it you just kind of put on the back burner? You know what? I say I'm forgiving them. I just ain't going to have anything to do with it. I just don't care what happens to them. Today is the day that I want you to begin to deal with that. Today is the day that I want us to start down the pathway of total forgiveness. Today is the day I want you to look at those people that have wronged you. A church, a pastor, a former pastor. And I want you to begin the process of saying, God, help me to release them. And in doing so, help me to be free. God, I don't want them to bear guilt. I don't want them to be afraid of me. I don't want them to experience heartache and loss and all of those things. I don't want to repay evil for evil. Instead, I'm going to think good things for them and want good things for them. I'm going to totally forgive. But Jeremy, you might say, you don't know my story. Jeremy, you don't know what he did. You don't know what she did. You don't know what they said. You don't know. And you're right, I don't know your story, but I know Joseph's. And I know Jesus's. Both of them forgave completely. Both of them loved unconditionally. He's called us to do the same. Matt has come and he's going to start singing. And here's what I want you to do. It's just a little bit different. In your bulletins that you got when you came in, and if you didn't get one, the stage here is filled with them. You got this card. I want you to pull it out. On the front is our cleverly designed logo. The Bible verse that says, you intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. It's a reminder of Joseph's faith to forgive. The back is just lines. I'm going to give you a couple options as to what to do. It may be that you've got a long list of people that have wronged you. It may be that you've got a long list of grudges that you need to work towards forgiveness. If that's you, then I just want you to take a pen. If you need a pen, there's pens down here. There's pens on the front row. As Matt sings, come and get one. I want you to write those names down. This is just for you. Don't cheat on your neighbors. This is not to show to anybody. This is just saying, you know what? This is the person that I need to forgive. This is the person that God needs to do something in my heart. I want you to write that down. For some of you, it may be very easy for you to go, you know what? There may be a list, but there's one. There's one person that I just can't forgive. In that case, what I want you to do is I want you to write him a letter. I don't want you to mail it. I don't want you to give it to me or nail it to a cross. I want you to just write it. It's just between you and God. We asked you, what would you say if you had an opportunity to talk to the people that have wronged you? This may be your only opportunity. What would you say? And as we leave here today, I want you to take these cards with you. It's done this way so that you can put it on your mirror. You can put it on your dashboard. You can tape it to something else. It doesn't matter. You can hide what's on the back. You know what's there. It's not for anybody else to see. Every time you see this verse, you can be reminded of the journey that God is taking you on to totally forgive someone. Not just say they're forgiven, but to not want them to be afraid of you, to not want them to harbor guilt, to want good things for them, to let them save face, to release it. As Matt plays and sings, you can sing, you can stay seated, but we're going to take an extended period of time because I want you to write. And I want you to write down some names, and I want you to write down your letter. And I want you to do some business with God. And after 5 or 6 minutes, we'll conclude the story.